Part 1. Faustus was born in Germany, in a town called Rode. His parents were not rich, but the boy showed that he was very intelligent and ambitious. He was sent to Wittenberg University when he was a young man and soon made a reputation for himself. He became famous in the university for his knowledge and his wit, and it was not long before the university made him Dr. Faustus. His success meant very little to him, however, and he longed for excitement and glamour. One night, he was in his study thinking about the future. His studies now seemed dull to him, and he did not know what he should do. He looked at the books lying on his desk and began to pick them up one by one. The first book he picked up was a study of Aristotle. He turned the pages idly. "The purpose of logic is to argue well," he read. He threw the book back onto the desk impatiently. "I've learned everything that was possible from logic. I can argue and debate better than most of the professors here at the university," he thought. He picked up a second book from the desk and glanced at the title page. "The purpose of medicine is health," he read. Again he threw the book back onto his desk impatiently. "I'm already famous for my medical skills," he thought proudly. "I don't need to study medicine anymore. Besides, what can medicine do? It can't make people live forever, and it can't bring the dead back to life." Once again he reached for a book from the pile on his desk. This time, he picked up a volume about law. Law, he thought scornfully. That might be all right for someone who just wants to make money, but law doesn't satisfy me. Finally, Dr. Faustus picked up a Bible. This is still the best subject to study, he thought. He turned the pages of the Bible with interest and then read a passage. "If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and there is no truth in us," he read. "But if that's true," Faustus suddenly thought, "we're all sinners. Sinners go to hell when they die. We'll all go to hell," he concluded. "There's nothing we can do about it at all. It's just inevitable." He pushed the Bible away from him impatiently. He reached out for another book. "Ah," he said excitedly, "a book of magic and spells. That's what really interests me. If I learnt the black arts, just think what I could do. I'd be more powerful than a king or emperor. This is the subject I want to know more about." Dr. Faustus had made up his mind. He was going to learn about magic and the black arts. He thought about two friends he had in Wittenberg, Valdes and Cornelius. They both studied magic, and they had offered to teach Faustus what they knew. Just at that moment, Faustus's servant Wagner came into the study. "Go and find Valdes and Cornelius," Faustus instructed him. "Ask them to come here to see me." "Yes, sir," said Wagner. He left the room and went to look for his master's two friends. Faustus sat by the fire waiting for them to come. Suddenly, he saw two angels in front of him, a good angel and a bad angel. "Don't do it, Faustus," the good angel cried. "Put that book about magic away. Read the Bible and save your soul." Now the bad angel began to speak. "Learn about magic, Faustus. You'll become rich, powerful, and famous." Faustus was excited at the decision he had made. He imagined himself with spirits that he could command, and he amused himself by thinking what he would tell them to do. They could bring him gold from India. They could bring him exotic food from anywhere in the world. They could debate philosophy with him. He spent the time waiting for his friends, pleasantly daydreaming about the future. At last Valdes and Cornelius arrived. Dr. Faustus greeted them keenly. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told them, "and I've decided to accept your offer. I want you to teach me everything you know about magic. I'm tired of philosophy and law and medicine and divinity. I want something new." Valdes was very pleased with Faustus's decision. "We'll show you everything," he said. "The spirits will soon obey you, and then you can do whatever you want. The spirits will protect you, and they can become any shape you want. They'll do whatever you tell them to. Yes, it's true. Once you see what magic can do for you, you'll never want to study anything else, Faustus. Magic will make you rich and famous, I promise you," Cornelius added. "Come and dine with me tonight," Faustus said excitedly. "You can tell me everything then. I'm determined to see what the spirits can do for me." Part 2. That evening, 2 scholars from the university walked past Dr. Faustus's house. "I wonder what's happened to Dr. Faustus," one of the scholars said. "There's his servant," the other scholar replied, pointing to someone in the street. "Let's ask him, shall we?" The 2 men stopped Wagner. "Where's your master?" one of them asked. "He's in the house, having dinner with Valdes and Cornelius," Wagner replied. One of the scholars sighed. "I was afraid of this," he said sadly. "It looks as if Faustus has decided to take up magic. Valdes and Cornelius are famous for their love of magic." "Let's talk to the rector of the university," his friend suggested. "He may be able to warn Faustus not to do it." "We can try, but I don't think it'll do any good." The 2 scholars walked away sadly. They did not like to think that their friend had taken up such a dangerous interest. A while later, Valdes and Cornelius came out of the house. They had kept their promise. They had told Faustus everything they knew about magic, and they had given him some books and spells. After saying goodbye to the 2 men, Faustus ran eagerly back into his study. He closed the door behind him. He drew a circle on the floor of the study and wrote various magic names inside it. He also drew stars on the floor. He then picked up the book that Valdes and Cornelius had left behind and began to read aloud from it. He was trying to make a spirit appear before him. At first, nothing happened. Then Faustus heard a terrible noise of thunder. He went on reading aloud, and a devil suddenly appeared in the room. Faustus was so surprised that he nearly dropped the book. He was thrilled at his success, however, and he decided to see if the devil would do what he ordered. "Go away," he commanded. "You're too ugly to appear in front of me. Go away and come back in the form of a Franciscan friar." The devil, whose name was Mephistopheles, bowed courteously and disappeared. A few minutes later he returned to the study. Once again he bowed politely to Dr. Faustus. "What do you want me to do?" Mephistopheles asked. "I command you to obey me during my life," Faustus ordered. "You must do whatever I tell you to." "I am Lucifer's servant," Mephistopheles replied. "I can only obey you if he tells me to." This was not what Faustus had expected. "But didn't Lucifer send you to me just now?" he asked. "No," Mephistopheles said quietly. "I came here because I wanted to." "But I summoned you," Faustus said angrily. "You came because of my magic. That's the truth, isn't it?" "I came because I heard you cursing God," Mephistopheles said. "When we devils hear someone doing that, we always come. It's a chance for us, you see. A person who curses God is in danger of damnation. Tell me about Lucifer, Faustus ordered. He was an angel once, wasn't he? Yes, he was, Mephistopheles said quietly. And God loved him. But Lucifer was proud, you see, and God threw him into hell. What about you? Faustus wanted to know. What about you and all the other devils? We were angels too, Mephistopheles admitted. We joined Lucifer when he rebelled against God. We are damned with Lucifer in hell. But you're not in hell now, Faustus objected. You're free. You can walk around. Mephistopheles smiled contemptuously at Faustus. This is hell, he informed him. I was an angel once and I saw the face of God. I knew all the delights of heaven. Of course this is hell. I have a message for Lucifer, Faustus told Mephistopheles. Go and tell him that I am ready to give him my soul. Tell him that he must give me 24 years of life in exchange for it. During those 24 years, Lucifer must give me everything I ask for. Tell him that I want you to be my servant during those 24 years. I'll tell him, Mephistopheles agreed. Bring me his answer later tonight, Faustus commanded. Mephistopheles made a courteous bow before he disappeared. Faustus was very excited. He could hardly wait for Mephistopheles to come back. He began dreaming about what he would do once Lucifer had agreed to his offer. How everybody would wonder at him if he could control the spirits. What things he could learn. He would astonish the whole world with his learning and his cleverness. Part 3. While Faustus was waiting for Mephistopheles to return, he thought more closely about what he was doing. One part of him was afraid. He knew that he was turning away from God forever. He knew that he would lose his soul. But another part of him was thrilled at the thought of the power that Lucifer would give him. He struggled with his conscience. As he was arguing with himself, the good angel and bad angel came back into the study. Go forward, Faustus. The bad angel whispered to him. You'll soon be famous and rich. Stop, Faustus, the good angel cried. You'll lose your soul. The two angels looked at him for a moment, and then they left the study. I'll be rich, Faustus said to himself, and Mephistopheles will be my servant. Suddenly he put his doubts aside. It was nearly midnight. He stood inside the magic circle and raised his arms. Mephistopheles, he cried, come here. Mephistopheles suddenly appeared in the study. What did Lucifer say? Faustus asked impatiently. Did he agree to everything? He agreed, Mephistopheles said quietly. I'll be your servant for 24 years, and you will then give Lucifer your soul. But there's one condition, he added softly. Lucifer wants a proper contract with you. You must write the agreement in your own blood. Lucifer insists on it. If you don't give him a proper contract, I'll go straight back to him and you won't see me anymore. I'll do it, Faustus said. Faustus took a knife and cut his arm. It was a deep cut, and blood poured out. Now write the contract, commanded Mephistopheles sternly. He handed Faustus a pen. Faustus dipped the pen into his blood and began to write. As he was writing, the blood in the pen suddenly dried. He shook the pen, but it was blocked. What does this mean? He asked himself. He felt afraid again. Why can't I write? He asked Mephistopheles anxiously. Don't worry, Mephistopheles said reassuringly. I'll heat the pen with some coal. It'll work then. Mephistopheles took the pen and warmed it over some coal. The blood was soon flowing once more, and Faustus began to write the contract. Faustus shall be a spirit in body and soul. Mephistopheles will be his servant. Mephistopheles will do everything that Faustus commands. Mephistopheles will be invisible when he comes to Faustus's house. Mephistopheles shall appear in the shape that Faustus command. At the bottom of this document, Faustus wrote, I, John Faustus, agree that Lucifer and his servants can come and carry me away with them after 24 years. Then he signed his name on the contract. It's done, he cried triumphantly. But there's something written on my arm, cried Faustus in alarm. Homo fuge! All his fear came back to him in a rush. But where can I run to? God will throw me down to hell. Mephistopheles could see that Faustus was regretting what he had done. He decided to offer him a little distraction from the terrible signing of the contract. He made a discreet sign with his hand, and a group of devils entered the study. They were richly dressed, and they began a ceremonial dance around the room. What's this for? Faustus asked curiously. It's nothing. I just thought it would amuse you, Mephistopheles said. Can I raise spirits like these when I want to? Faustus asked. Of course you can, Mephistopheles said. You can do much more than that. But give me the contract, he ordered. Faustus handed it to him. Mephistopheles read it quickly. There was a gleam in his eye as he folded the piece of paper away carefully. Then he turned to Faustus with a smile. Now you can ask me anything you want, he informed him. Faustus asked Mephistopheles to tell him about hell. Where exactly is it? He wanted to know. Hell is everywhere, replied Mephistopheles. Wherever we devils are, that is hell. It's the place where we suffer and are tortured. I don't believe in hell, Faustus announced firmly. I think hell's a fable. Wait until you get there, Mephistopheles said quietly. Then you'll change your mind. Do you really think I'll go to hell? Faustus asked uneasily. Of course you will, Mephistopheles told him. I've got the contract. You've promised to give Lucifer your soul after 24 years. It's a fable, Faustus repeated. Then how do you explain me? Mephistopheles asked softly. I am damned, and I am in hell. Faustus laughed scornfully. You can walk around and eat and enjoy yourself. If you can do all of that in hell, I don't mind being damned. But let's not talk about that, he decided. Bring me a wife, Mephistopheles. I want the most beautiful girl in Germany for my wife, he said excitedly. Mephistopheles made another discreet sign, and a female devil appeared. She was old and terribly ugly. Faustus looked at her in disgust. He shrank back against the wall. Mephistopheles watched Faustus with amusement. Don't talk about wives, he said. Marriage is just an empty ceremony. I'll bring you the most beautiful girl, a different one each day. But don't think about marriage if you want me to be your servant. And now I have a present for you, he said. He gave Faustus a book. This book contains all kinds of magic spells, he told him. There are spells for gold, spells for controlling the wind, and all sorts of other magic. Faustus took the book gratefully. He turned the pages quickly. Thanks, Mephistopheles, he said. Part 4. The days after he signed the agreement with Lucifer were busy ones for Faustus. Mephistopheles organized a variety of entertainment and a lot of journeys for him. They talked together about philosophy and science. Mephistopheles kept him amused and entertained, although sometimes Faustus noticed that his devil servant never fully answered the questions that he was asked. At times Faustus was very unhappy, and he blamed Mephistopheles for tempting him. But Mephistopheles mocked him. "It was your own doing," he reminded him. "You wanted to learn about magic and to have power and money. Remember? You wanted to astonish the world with your learning and your wit. You signed the agreement with Lucifer." "I'm going to give up magic," Faustus said. "I want to repent." The good angel and the bad angel entered the study. "Give up this magic, and God will forgive you," the good angel said. "You have become a devil," the bad angel said. "God cannot forgive you." "Even if I am a devil, God can still forgive me," Faustus said. "God will forgive me if I repent." "You will never repent," the bad angel told him. The good and the bad angels left the study. Faustus was in terrible agony now. He was terrified of what he had done, and he tried to repent, but it was no good. He remembered the wonderful things that Mephistopheles had showed him, and the places he had seen. He knew that the pleasures Mephistopheles gave him would prevent him from repenting. Mephistopheles and Faustus had many intellectual discussions together, but Faustus did not learn very much from them. It seemed to him that Mephistopheles did not give him any new knowledge. He merely repeated things that Faustus already knew, and there were some questions that he refused to answer at all. Once, they were having a discussion about the movement of the stars and planets. Faustus asked questions as usual and listened with irritation to the simple answers that his servant from hell gave him. At last he expressed his impatience. "You only tell me things that anyone with some education could tell me," he complained bitterly. "I didn't agree to give my soul to Lucifer so that I could hear things that any student might tell me. Let's talk about something else. Tell me, Mephistopheles," he asked, "who made the world?" Mephistopheles was silent for a moment. He avoided Faustus's eyes. "I won't tell you," he said at last. "Please," Faustus insisted, "answer my question." "Don't ask me that again," Mephistopheles said menacingly. Suddenly Faustus gave way to all the anger and frustration he had been feeling. "You promised to obey me," he said angrily. "That was our agreement." "I promised to tell you everything that I could," Mephistopheles replied. "But this question is against the rules of hell. I can't answer it. Don't think about it any more, Faustus. You'd be better to think about hell. You are damned." Faustus was disappointed in Mephistopheles, and all his bitterness and rage made him determined to outrage his servant. "I won't think about hell," cried Faustus. "I want to think about God who made the world. I want to save my soul. Go away from me, you devil," he shouted. Mephistopheles left the room angrily. "It can't be too late to save my soul," Faustus cried in misery. The good angel and the bad angel entered the room when they heard these desperate words. The bad angel, who was the first to speak, whispered softly, "It is too late, Faustus. You cannot save your soul now. You've gone too far." "It's never too late, Faustus," the good angel said. "Repent, Faustus, and save your soul. If you repent, Faustus, devils will come and tear you to pieces." The bad angel threatened him. "Repent, and they will never touch you." the good angel said. The two angels left the room. Faustus decided to make one last effort to be free of Lucifer and Mephistopheles. He began to pray. "Christ, help me! Help to save my soul," he began. Suddenly there was a great crash in the room, and Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Mephistopheles stood in front of him. They were angry, and Faustus was afraid of what they were going to do to him. "Christ can't help you," Lucifer said coldly. "You belong to me now, Faustus." "Who are you?" Faustus asked. He was trembling with fear because Lucifer and his devils were about to kill him and drag him off to hell with them. "I'm Lucifer, and this is Beelzebub." Faustus looked at Lucifer in horror. He thought he was going to die. "You've come to take my soul," he cried. "You've come to carry me off to hell." Lucifer smiled reassuringly at Faustus and shook his head. "We've come to talk to you," he said. "That's all. You're breaking the agreement, Faustus." "That's right," Beelzebub said. "You shouldn't be talking about God and Christ. You should be thinking about hell," Lucifer explained. Faustus gazed in panic at the three devils that were standing in front of him. He was terrified. "I'll never do it again," he promised. "I'll never mention God or Christ again. I promise." "We've come from hell to show you something amusing," Beelzebub announced. "Sit down, and we'll show you the 7 deadly sins. You'll enjoy this. I promise you." "Mephistopheles, bring them in," commanded Lucifer. The 7 deadly sins entered the room. "You can ask them anything," Beelzebub told Faustus airily. "They'll tell you anything you want to know about them." Faustus looked at the first deadly sin. "Who are you?" he asked. "Tell me about yourself." "I am pride," the deadly sin replied haughtily. "Women love me. Sometimes they put me on their heads and admire themselves. Sometimes they hang me round their necks like a necklace. They adore me." The deadly sin paused and pulled an ugly face. "But what's that terrible smell in here?" he cried. "I won't stay here a moment longer unless you sprinkle perfume on the ground and give me the finest carpet to walk on." Faustus laughed delightedly. "You're proud, all right. I can see that," he said. "But what about you?" he asked, turning to the next deadly sin. "Who are you?" "I'm covetousness," the deadly sin replied. "If I had my way, you'd all be turned to gold and I'd lock you in my chest. Gold, gold, gold. That's what I love." "And what about you?" Faustus asked the third deadly sin. "Who are you?" "I'm envy," the deadly sin told him. "I can't read, and so I want to burn every book in the world. I hate to see other people happy." "And you?" Faustus asked the fourth deadly sin. "Who are you?" "I'm wrath. I was born in hell and I roam around the world with a sword." Faustus turned to the fifth deadly sin. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm gluttony," the deadly sin replied. "My parents are dead, and they left me just enough money for 30 meals and 10 snacks a day. Will you ask me to stay for dinner, Faustus?" Faustus laughed again and dismissed the deadly sin. "Who are you?" he asked the sixth deadly sin. "I'm sloth. I lie in the sun all day and I never do anything. Why have you disturbed me by bringing me here?" I won't say another word until you put me back in the place I came from." "And you, the seventh?" asked Faustus. "Who are you?" "I'm lechery," the deadly sin told him. "All my pleasures are in the body." "That's enough," Lucifer now announced. "Go away to hell," he commanded. The deadly sins left. "What a show," said Faustus. "But how I would love to see hell and come back again." "We can arrange that," said Lucifer before he left. Part 5. Mephistopheles and Faustus now set out on an 8-day tour of the universe. They flew around the stars together, and Faustus learned a great deal about astronomy. Faustus was delighted with this experience, and soon started on another grand journey, this time around the world. He and Mephistopheles finally traveled through the important cities of Germany, France, and Italy. At last, they arrived in Rome. They saw the historical sights of Rome together, and Faustus was again delighted with the experience. Mephistopheles now told him that he had planned something special for him. "We're going to the papal palace," he announced. Faustus knew that Pope Adrian was about to celebrate his victory over the rival German Pope, Bruno. An important feast had been planned. Suddenly he decided that the feast would be a splendid occasion for him to show his powers. "This feast is a very important one for the Pope," he said to Mephistopheles, "and I'd like to play some part in it. Can you devise some way that I can do that?" Mephistopheles promised to organize something for Faustus, and the two of them hurried to the palace. When they arrived, they were just in time to see Pope Adrian, his guest King Raymond of Hungary, and the cardinals with their prisoner Bruno. The cardinals threw the rival pope to the ground, and Pope Adrian walked over him to reach his throne. "Bruno helps the rightful pope to climb into Peter's chair," commented Raymond. "That place is mine," cried Bruno bitterly. "I am the Pope." Pope Adrian sneered at Bruno's words. "You're my prisoner," he told him, "and you'll soon find out what your rightful place is." He signaled to the cardinals of France and Padua. "Go and find out what the Synod has decided to do with Bruno," he commanded. The two cardinals hurried from the chamber. Faustus suddenly had an idea, and began whispering hurriedly to Mephistopheles. "You go with the cardinals," he hissed. "Make them fall asleep, and then you and I will take their places. We'll talk to the Pope, and we'll set Bruno free," he concluded boldly. The rival pope, meanwhile, was trying to argue with Pope Adrian. "You know that I was appointed by the German emperor," he said. "I'm going to punish the German emperor as well," Adrian said proudly. "First I'll excommunicate him, and then I'll take his crown from him." Bruno tried once more to argue his case. "What about the promise that Pope Julius made to the German Emperor Sigismund?" he went on. "He promised that the popes of Rome would always acknowledge the German emperor as their lord." Adrian dismissed the argument with a wave of the hand. "Julius broke the rules of the church when he made that promise," he said. "His decrees mean nothing. The power of the whole world belongs to the Pope, not to emperors and kings." Just then, Faustus and Mephistopheles entered the chamber, disguised as the cardinals of France and Padua. "Well," asked Adrian, "what has the Synod decided to do with Bruno?" "They have decided to punish Bruno and the German emperor," Faustus replied solemnly. "They say that Bruno should be executed if his actions were not forced by the emperor. He should be burned at the stake." Pope Adrian smiled cruelly. "Take him away with you," he ordered Faustus and Mephistopheles. "Put him in prison, and we will decide what to do with him tomorrow. And take his crown with you," he added. "Put it in the papal treasury." Faustus and Mephistopheles hurried away with Bruno and the crown. Mephistopheles soon smuggled the rival pope away from the city. Now Faustus wanted to attend the pope's celebratory feast. "Make me invisible, Mephistopheles," he ordered. "I want to see what happens to the cardinals whose place we took earlier. I wonder what Pope Adrian will do to them." The guests were beginning to arrive for the feast when Faustus reached the palace. Pope Adrian was welcoming the cardinals. "Would you like to know what the synod has decided to do with Bruno?" one of the cardinals asked him. The pope looked at him in surprise. "What are you talking about?" he asked impatiently. "You've already told me the synod's decision that Bruno and the German emperor should be punished. You know I'm making my own decision about him tomorrow." "But we haven't said anything," the cardinal said in astonishment. King Raymond intervened angrily. "Don't deny it," he said sternly. "I was there. I heard you tell Pope Adrian what the synod had decided. You took Bruno away to prison with you, and you took his crown away with you as well." "You're mistaken," cried the cardinal fearfully. "I don't know what you're talking about." Suddenly, Pope Adrian got very angry. "Take these two to prison," he commanded his soldiers. "If they don't tell us where Bruno and the crown are, they will die for their sins." Soldiers suddenly appeared and removed the two terrified cardinals. Soon the Pope and his guests moved to the table to eat. Faustus went with them, moving unseen around the room. He was determined to enjoy himself as much as he could. Every time the Pope tried to lift some food to his mouth, an invisible hand snatched it away. When the Pope tried to drink, an invisible hand snatched his glass away. The Pope and his guests were astonished, and some of them were frightened. "I think there's a ghost at the feast," one of the archbishops said. "It must be the unhappy soul of some dead person who cannot find rest. He has come here to ask for your blessing." "You may be right," the Pope agreed. He ordered some priests to say prayers for the dead man. Then he crossed himself. Suddenly Faustus struck a hard blow at the Pope's ear. Pope Adrian jumped up from the table, holding his ear. He was furious at the insult. "I curse this soul!" he cried angrily. "What will you do now, Faustus?" Mephistopheles asked. "The Pope will ask the priest to curse you with bell, book, and candle." Part 6. Faustus and Mephistopheles returned to Wittenberg after their lengthy travels. His friends were happy to see Faustus again, and they were astonished at his new knowledge. His reputation as a learned man grew, and eventually he became famous throughout Germany. The Emperor, Charles V, heard of his extraordinary learning and sent for him. Not all of the emperor's knights were happy that Faustus had been invited to the palace. Benvolio in particular was very skeptical about the magic powers that Faustus was rumored to have. "Aren't you coming to see Faustus the great magician?" asked his friend Martino. "He says he's going to perform magic tricks never seen before in Germany." "I was out drinking last night," replied Benvolio, "and I've got a terrible headache. I can't be bothered to watch this magician. I may look out of my window to see what happens, but I won't come to the palace." The emperor welcomed Faustus very warmly. He thanked him for rescuing Bruno from Pope Adrian, and he promised Faustus his friendship. Faustus replied politely to the emperor's greeting and assured him of his loyalty. Then he promised to use his magic powers to amuse the emperor. "I can make the dead appear," he offered grandly. "Then show me Alexander the Great and his mistresses," the emperor said. "Show us what they really looked like." "And do it quickly," Benvolio muttered to himself as he looked out of the window of his house. "I'm tired already, and if you don't do something now, I'll fall asleep." Faustus overheard Benvolio's rude comment. "I'll do something. Don't worry, my friend," he said under his breath. Then he turned to Charles V. "When Alexander and his mistress appear," he advised him, "you must not ask them anything or touch them. They are spirits. If you can bring Alexander here, I'll be Actaeon and become a stag," Benvolio said sarcastically. "And I'll give you the horns to play your part well," Faustus muttered. After a short time, Alexander the Great appeared in front of the emperor. Charles watched in astonishment as Alexander killed Darius and then moved towards his mistress. Alexander took Darius's crown and placed it on his mistress' head. Then he turned towards Charles and waved to him. Charles V moved forward as if he wanted to touch Alexander's hand. Faustus put a hand on his shoulder. "You're forgetting that these are not real people, sir," he said. "They're spirits." "You're right, Faustus. They were so real I wanted to touch them," the emperor said. Suddenly Faustus pointed to the window where Benvolio had been watching events. Everyone looked up. Benvolio was asleep at the window, and there was a pair of horns on his head. They gasped in astonishment at the cleverness of the trick. "Benvolio, wake up!" called the emperor. "Who's disturbing me?" Benvolio asked sleepily. He put his hands to his head and rubbed it. "I've got such a headache," he complained. Everyone laughed and pointed at the horns on the unfortunate man's head. Benvolio was horrified when he realized what Faustus had done to him. "You deserve it," Faustus said to him. "Remember what you said. If you can bring Alexander here, I'll be Actaeon and become a stag. Now you have the horns. I think I'll call some hounds to hunt you down." Benvolio was terrified now. He begged Faustus not to call the hounds. The emperor asked Faustus to remove the horns from the poor man's head. Faustus agreed to do so. Later that day, several of the emperor's knights met to talk about Faustus. Benvolio wanted revenge for the trick that Faustus had played on him. He was determined to make Faustus suffer. "Think very carefully," Martina warned him. "Faustus is dangerous." "He insulted me," Benvolio said. "If you're a real friend of mine, you'll help me to avenge that insult." "Calm down," Frederick said. "We'll help you. Why don't we set an ambush for him?" he suggested. "We'll hide near the road, and when Faustus comes along, we'll kill him. He won't have a chance." The three knights waited for Faustus to come along. They did not have to wait long. Soon they could see Faustus walking by himself along the road. They did not know that Faustus was wearing a false head. "He's coming!" Frederick cried in excitement. "Quickly, men! Attack him with your swords!" Benvolio was the first man to take out his sword. He ran up behind Faustus and struck him on the head with his weapon. Faustus gave a terrible groan and fell to the ground. Benvolio cut off his head. "He wasn't so dangerous after all," Frederick commented. "Where's all his magic and power now, when he really needs it?" I'm going to put some horns on his head and hang it from the window where I was standing earlier," Benvolio said gleefully. The three knights began to talk excitedly about what they would do to hide Faustus's body. They were not looking at him while they were talking. Faustus quietly climbed to his feet and faced them. Benvolio was the first to see the headless man stand up. "He's alive!" he screamed. "Give him back his head!" Frederick shouted. Faustus looked at the knights with contempt. He smiled grimly at them. "Fools," he said. "Don't you know that I was given 24 years of life by Lucifer? Nothing can kill me during that time." Faustus called Mephistopheles and some other devils. They arrived immediately and stood waiting for his orders. "We'll make the world laugh at these men," he decided. "Take this one," he said, pointing at Benvolio. "Throw him into some filthy water." Then he pointed at Frederick. "And drag this one through the woods until his face bleeds." Finally, he pointed at Martino. "Take this one," he commanded the devils, "and roll him down a steep cliff to break his bones." The emperor's court was astonished later in the day when 3 dirty, blood-stained men entered the palace. The 3 men were the emperor's knights, Martino, Benvolio, and Frederick. It soon became known that the 3 knights had horns on their heads that they could not remove. "What can we do?" Frederick asked his friends. "We can't revenge ourselves on Faustus. He's too clever for us." "If we attack him again," Benvolio said, "he'll just put ass's ears on our heads. Everybody will laugh at us." "What can we do?" Martino wanted to know. "We must hide away from everyone," Benvolio said sadly. "I've got a castle deep in the country. Let's go there, where no one will see us and laugh at our misfortune." Part 7. Faustus increasingly used his magic powers to play a lot of tricks on people. One day he was staying in an inn when he was approached by a horse dealer whose business was going badly. The horse dealer offered to buy Faustus' horse, which he had seen and admired. "I'll give you $40 for the horse," he offered. Faustus smiled at the man. "You can't buy a horse as good as this one for $40, he said. "I'm not even sure that I want to sell him, but I might change my mind if you offered $50. The horse dealer shook his head sadly. "I haven't got $50, he said bitterly. "I've lost a lot of money on horses recently. Please take $40 for yours." "All right," Faustus agreed. "I'll take $40 for the horse, but there's one thing you've got to know about this horse. He's an excellent animal in every way. You can ride him anywhere, and he'll always do what you want. But you mustn't ride him into water. Do you understand me? Never take this horse into water." "What's the matter with him?" the horse dealer asked. "He drinks water, doesn't he?" Faustus smiled again. "Oh yes," he replied. "He drinks water all right, but never ride him over water." The horse dealer paid Faustus $40 and rode the horse away. He thought he had made a good bargain, and he was a happy man. Faustus watched the man ride away. Suddenly, he felt unbearably sad. He knew that the 24 years he had agreed with Lucifer were coming to an end. He was tired and decided to sleep for a while. The horse dealer, meanwhile, took the horse that Faustus had sold him and rode him around for a while. The horse was a good animal and very lively. The horse dealer wondered why Faustus had told him not to ride the animal into water, and he decided to find out what would happen. He rode the horse into a shallow river. the animal suddenly disappeared, and the poor man found himself sitting on a wet bundle of straw in the middle of the river. Faustus was sleeping when the horse dealer came back. The man was wet and dirty, and he was furious. He began shouting and swearing. He was looking for Faustus and threw open the door of the room where the magician was sleeping. He tried to wake him up by pulling his leg, and suddenly, Faustus's leg came off in the horse dealer's hand. "What have I done?" the man cried in despair. "Have I killed him?" Faustus began to call for help. "Murder! Help me, good people! I'm being murdered!" The horse dealer panicked and ran away. Faustus laughed to see the man running off. "I've got my leg back," he joked to himself, "and he's got a bundle of wet straw for his $40. Faustus was now so famous that important people were always inviting him to their houses so that he could show them his special powers. One of the visits that he paid was to the Duke of Vanholt. He showed the Duke and his wife many wonderful sights, including a castle that floated in the air. The Duke was very pleased with his guest and thanked him for what he had shown them. Faustus turned to the Duke's wife, who was expecting a child. "I've heard that women in your condition often have strange longings," he told her. "Is there any delicacy that I can fetch for you? Anything in the whole world?" The Duchess thought for a moment, and then she smiled. "There is one thing," she told him softly. "It's the middle of winter now, and I keep dreaming of grapes. I would love to eat some grapes." "That's an easy matter," Faustus told her with a smile. He made a sign to Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles disappeared, and after a few minutes he came back. He was carrying a large bunch of grapes in his hand. Faustus took the grapes and gave them to the Duchess with a bow. "Try these," he said. "They should be good." The Duchess was astonished. She took the grapes and ate some. "They're delicious," she told Faustus. "The best grapes I've ever tasted." "But where do they come from?" asked the Duke. "It's winter here," Faustus explained, "but in other parts of the world it's summer. Mephistopheles flew to another part of the world to pick these grapes for you." Part 8. The 24 years of the contract were now nearly over. Faustus and Mephistopheles returned to Wittenberg once again. Faustus's servant Wagner sensed that a great change was coming, but he did not understand what was really happening to his master. "We just knew that Faustus had made a will. He's left everything to me," the servant said to himself in wonder. "But if he thinks he's going to die soon, why does he go on entertaining people and laughing and joking?" The servant shook his head sadly. There were things about Faustus that he could not understand, even after all these years of serving him. One evening, Faustus invited two old friends from the university to dine with him. The two scholars were delighted with the dinner he gave them, and they were pleased to see that Faustus had lost none of his old wit and intelligence. Soon the conversation turned to the great beauties of the classical world. "Faustus," said one of the scholars, "we've all read about Helen of Troy. We know that she was the most beautiful woman of her time. Can you use your powers to make her appear before us? We'd like to see for ourselves this wonder of the ancient world." Faustus smiled at his old friends. "Of course I can," he said gently. "I'll make her appear for you." He gave a quick signal to Mephistopheles, and the room was suddenly full of music. A few minutes passed, and then they saw Helen appear. The two scholars were amazed. "I can't describe such beauty," one of the scholars said. I'm not surprised the Greeks fought a 10-year war for this woman, the other scholar said. She's the most beautiful woman one could imagine. Soon afterwards, the two scholars thanked Faustus for his hospitality and went home. He sat by himself for a while, thinking about the agreement he had made with Lucifer. His thoughts were somber and grim. Suddenly an old man entered the study. "Give up this magic," the old man said gently. "Give it all up, Faustus, and turn to God. You've been a wicked man, but if you continue, you'll become a devil. Give it up, Faustus, and repent." Faustus looked at the old man in despair. "It's too late," he replied quietly. "My soul is damned. I can't do anything about it now. I can only die now." Mephistopheles handed Faustus a dagger. "Hell is calling me," Faustus went on. "My time is nearly finished." Faustus pointed the dagger at his heart. "Stop," the old man cried. "Don't give in to despair. You mustn't think you're too wicked for God to save you. That sin of despair is the worst of all. I can see an angel above your head, Faustus. Ask the angel for forgiveness. It's not too late." The old man's words gave Faustus hope. "Let me think about what you've told me," he said. "Give me some time to think about my sins." "I'll leave you then," the old man agreed. "But I'm afraid for you, Faustus." Faustus sat in the study, thinking hard. He repented his agreement with Lucifer, but he knew there was one sin that he could not overcome. "The old man is right," he told himself. "This despair of mine is just pride. I know that, but I can't change myself. Heaven and hell are fighting inside me." Suddenly, Mephistopheles became very angry and began threatening Faustus. "You're going against our agreement," he raged. "You should be thinking about hell and not about saving your soul. I'll tear you to pieces, Faustus." Faustus looked at Mephistopheles in horror. He was terrified of what Lucifer and his devils would do to him if he made them angry. "Forgive me, Mephistopheles," he begged. "I won't do it again. I promise." Mephistopheles did not say anything, but continued glaring fiercely at Faustus. "I didn't mean it, really, I didn't," Faustus cried desperately. "Please tell Lucifer I didn't mean it. Tell him I'll even write another letter confirming our agreement. I'll write it in blood like I did before, shall I?" "Perhaps you should," Mephistopheles agreed. "Don't hurt me," Faustus pleaded. "Hurt that old man who came here and talked to me about repentance. He's the one to blame, not me." Mephistopheles smiled at Faustus. "The old man? I can't do anything to hurt his soul because his faith is very strong, but I can hurt his body." Faustus was very relieved that Mephistopheles' anger was turning away from him to another victim. "One last thing I ask of you, old friend," he now said. "Make Helen return here as my lover. Her beauty will stop these dark thoughts of mine." Mephistopheles grinned at Faustus. He knew that this latest wish was a terrible sin, and he relished the idea of Faustus losing his soul. Soon, the spirit of Helen of Troy appeared in the study. Faustus gazed at her in wonder and awe. "Come to me, Helen," he said, "and let me kiss you." The spirit of Helen embraced Faustus. "Your kisses take my immortal soul," he breathed softly. "Look where it flies away from me. Kiss me again and give me back my soul." The old man entered the study again and stood watching Faustus and Helen's sorrow fully. "Now you are really damned, Faustus," he said angrily. "You've driven heaven away from you by this wickedness." Some of Lucifer's devils now entered the study in terrifying shapes. They stood around the old man trying to frighten him. "My faith is stronger than you," the old man told them contemptuously. "You can't hurt me. God will always protect me." Part 9. At last, the 24 years that Lucifer had given Faustus came to an end. Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Mephistopheles came up from hell to witness the death of the man who had given them his soul. "Faustus is ours at midnight," Lucifer said triumphantly. "His soul is damned forever." The two scholars whom Faustus had entertained happened to call on him during the evening, and they found Faustus in a gloomy mood. "Why didn't I stay here in Wittenberg with you?" Faustus asked them sadly. "My life would have been different, and I would not have been damned." "He must be ill," one of the scholars said. "Let's fetch a doctor for him." "It's a moral sickness," Faustus said, "and there's no doctor in the world who can cure me." "If that's really true," one of the scholars said, "pray to God for help." Faustus smiled grimly at the mention of God. Then he told his visitors about the secret of his life. He explained about the agreement he had made with Lucifer, and how the 24 years were at an end. He told them there could be no forgiveness for him. "Pray to God," the scholar repeated. "How can I pray to God?" Faustus cried desperately. "When I turned away from him all those years ago, God will never forgive me. Besides," he went on, "they stop me praying. They hold my hands when I want to pray." "Who does, Faustus?" one of the scholars cried. "Who stops you praying?" "Lucifer and Mephistopheles stopped me praying. I gave them my soul for my cunning," Faustus said. The two scholars were very sorry for their old friend. They did not know what they could do to help him. They promised to pray for him. "The time has nearly come," Faustus whispered. "You must go. It might be dangerous for you to stay here." The scholars did not want to leave him alone, so they went into the room next to the study. They began to pray for their friend's soul. When Faustus was alone again in the study, Mephistopheles appeared. He seemed very cheerful at the thought of Faustus's death. "It's all your fault," Faustus told him. "You tempted me, and I listened to you. You've robbed me of the happiness I could have had in heaven." "It's true," Mephistopheles admitted, with a cruel smile. "I was there right from the start. Do you remember that evening you were looking through your books on the desk? Do you remember the page you opened in the Bible? 'If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and there is no truth in us'? It was me that turned the pages of the Bible to find those lines. It was I, Faustus." The good angel and the bad angel now entered the study. "You should have listened to me, Faustus," the good angel told him sadly. "You loved the pleasures of the world too much. And now you must try the pains of hell," the bad angel mocked him. The clock struck 11. "Just 1 hour," Faustus thought with horror. "And then my soul goes to hell forever. If only the time would go slowly," he thought. "I wish the sun would rise in the sky so that it would never be midnight." The clock struck the half hour. "Time won't stand still for me," Faustus thought desperately. "Then God, don't let me stay in hell forever. 1,000 years, 100,000 years, but save me in the end." Slowly, the hands of the clock moved towards midnight. At last the moment had come. There was a crash of thunder outside the house, and Lucifer and his devils entered the study. They moved towards him, grinning and sneering at his suffering. "No, Lucifer, no, give me one more minute," Faustus cried in horror. When the scholars came into Faustus's study a few hours later, they were sure that something dreadful had happened to their friend. They had heard the thunder during the night, and they were nervous. What they saw as they came into the study horrified them. Faustus had been torn to pieces by the devils.